Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second episode, part A of the Anatomy and Physiology series. My name is Ridhi Sreenivas, and today we're going to be talking about the four main types of tissues found in the body. But I'm going to be dividing this second episode into four parts. So this is part A, and there'll be a part B, C, D for the other three tissues, just so that it isn't as long of a video and will hopefully be more digestible for everyone. But let's get right into it. So first of all, what is a tissue? Now, a tissue is a group of the same type of cells that work together to carry out a certain function. And if you were curious, the study of tissues is called histology. But now, there are four main types of tissues found in the body, the four main categories, and there are multiple types of tissues found in each category, or like part of each category that you may have already heard about. Like, for example, one type of connective tissue are bones. So, you may have already heard of some of these things, but these are just the main four categories. And they are epithelial tissue, connective tissue, muscular tissue, and nervous tissue. But specifically in this video, we're going to be talking about epithelial tissue. So the main job of this type of tissue, of course, depending on where it is, but the general job of it is to line external or internal surfaces of the body. Just depends where it is. But that's the main job of this type of tissue. It lines those external and internal surfaces. For example, epithelial tissue is quite literally what the surface of our skin is made of. So it lines our external surface of our body. While also it lines the multiple internal tracts of the body, like the digestive, urinary, respiratory, and reproductive tracts. So lining those internal surfaces of the body as well. But there are a lot more functions to it that we're going to talk about at the end of the video. But let's first go into some of the general characteristics of epithelial tissue. So first of all of the cells in epithelial tissue are bound to something called a basement membrane. So let me okay. So these are the epithelial cells, right? These cube ones, the cuboidal ones. So these are the cells, right? They are all going to be bound to this basement membrane. As you can see in gray, right here it's being pointed to. That's the basement membrane. They're all bound to it, no matter what. And what this does is it provides structural support for this type of tissue and also allows it to be selective to what is letting in and out, which we're also going to talk about this when we get to functions as well. It's just like a component that helps with that function. Okay, another characteristic is epithelial tissue is avascular, meaning that this tissue isn't nourished with blood directly. There are no blood vessels directly integrated into this type of tissue. So it basically just gets its nutrients from other tissues that it's exposed to. And we're going to talk a little more about that later when we get into skin. But just important thing to know, vascular means that there are blood vessels that provide blood. When you add the A in front of it, it just means the opposite. So epithelial tissue is avascular. But we're going to talk a little bit more about that when we get to skin and tegumentary stuff. But now another characteristic of epithelial tissue is it is made almost entirely of cells that are closely packed together. And when I say almost, this means that there are, of course, little bits of extracellular matrix around, but for the most part, these cells are tightly packed together, kind of like a brick wall, as I'm showing you here. So I think it's just an interesting analogy, so you can just remember that. And the last general characteristic I'm going to talk about is that epithelial tissue is polar. And in a, simplified way, in this context at least, it just means that there's this distinctive top and bottom surface of the tissue, which has different properties, so it can control what controls like what crosses the cell layer and like the transporting of ions and other cellular substances controls that. We're going to talk a little more about that in the future as well. Just important to know that. But now, what are the different ways epithelial tissues can be classified? And what I kind of mean by this is what are the different types of epithelial tissue and what do we call them? How can we distinguish different types based on their structures? Because like the type of epithelial tissue you find on the surface of your skin isn't going to be the same type of epithelial tissue found lining your digestive tract because they have similar functions, they have similar general functions, but they still like have different things they need to do, like slightly different things they need to do. So how can we classify that? And there's two categories. First is the number of cell layers, and two is the shape of the cells in those cell layers. So let's look at the first one. So there's two ways this could go. It could be either simple or stratified. Now, simple refers to there being one layer of the cells, and I'll show you guys pictures in a minute. But stratified refers to there being several layers of that type of cell. So next, in the next category, and it'll make sense when I show you guys the diagrams when we get to the bottom. But let's go look at things in terms of cell shape, the second classification piece. So there are three main types of cell shapes. I'm going to talk a little bit about these two later. These two are kind of special. So I'll talk about them later. But we're gonna like focus on these three first. So first we have squamous, which means scale-like, because these cells kind of look like fish scales, if you've ever seen them before. They have like that fish scale-like thing. So, that's similar shape. So that's why it's called squamous. Next, we have cuboidal because they have like this cube, square-like shape, right? Next is columnar because they look like long columns. They look like longer compared to the other cells. So it kind of reminds me of like columns, right? And this is a diagram of what like simple squamous looks like, stratified squamous. So, but like, why is this important? Why are classifications important? Because a big like biology concept is structure can tell us the function of something. Because like the structure of something can give us clues to what the function of it is, and by knowing that we can help advance like our knowledge of what might this organ do, what are its properties, and can help diagnose issues and make advancements and all that. That's why classifications are very important. Okay, but let's use an example here so you guys can kind of understand like how we can derive the function of something from the structure. But like I'm kind of gonna do it backwards. So like it makes a little. You can just see how it goes like two-way, right? So, for instance, like let's just take stratified squamous epithelium. This one right here. Let's see this one. Okay. So this type of tissue is found in many different places, of course, in the body, but like one place it's found is the epidermis, which is the most superficial layer of the skin. And how can we tell? Well, let me just explain first what the function of the epidermis is. But if you can think of a function of the skin, like think of one. There's many different ones, but one that comes to my mind right now is the skin is the first line of defense for any pathogen to get into your body. So therefore, this top layer provides protection, right? And so how could we have been able to tell that based on knowing that the epidermis is stratified squamous epithelium? Well, the word stratified again refers to there being many layers of the cell, of that like type of cell. So if there are many layers, that means it should be like good for protecting compared to like it being simple, right? Because simple looks more fragile because there's only one layer of the cell, so it's going to be more fragile, therefore not as suitable for like explaining this function, right? So stratified kind of tells us, okay, this is a more mechanical work sort of thing that like this um organ does. And then now we can tell due to the shape being squamous, having that flat scale-like shape, that these um that these cells can effectively pack together, also contributing to function because like squamous cells have this like very good like they can tightly pack together well compared to the other shapes. So therefore also like telling us, oh, that this structure, this organ must be good at protection. And like stratified squamous epithelium, there are many types, like simple cuboidal epithelium, and I'm going to talk a little bit about those ones that I kind of skipped earlier, pseudostratified and transitional. So there are like other types that kind of don't have that like standard categories, like, oh, it's simple and cuboidal. Like they're not like they don't have those standard categories, they're a bit different. So transitional epithelium is when the cells change between squamous and cuboidal cells, being and this like type of tissue is found in the urinary bladder, renal pelvis, and ureters, perfect for like allowing these structures to hold those liquids without the tissue getting damaged. So that's where transitional epithelium is going to be really important in those areas, so that we can tell like because transitional epithelium is good at like stretching and stuff, that means that like the urinary bladder must be good at like holding liquids, and it just tells like the structure of this will tell us that the urinary bladder can do this, right? And now pseudostratified columnar epithelium is found in the respiratory tracts as it contains cells of different shapes. So it's going to look stratified, of course. You can kind of see it looks layered, but it isn't, since all the cells are still attached to the basement membrane. Mhm. So it's going to just appear layered, but really isn't. So that's why it's called pseudostratified. Just all different shapes of columnar. Now, I hope that kind of makes sense. It's so weird. There's so many different types, so hopefully it makes a bit of sense. But anyways, although different types of epithelial tissues may do different things in the body, here are some essential functions that epithelial tissue just does in general. So first we kind of touched on this one, but it provides protection to both internal and external surfaces from abrasion and pathogens and all that. And next function is since the epithelium is like the thing that like a substance needs to cross to enter or leave the human body, we can say that the epithelium controls like what's like can control like what enters and leaves. So it has that like has those like, and I kind of touched on this earlier, but it I don't know how to say that, but like it has those properties like polarity that allows certain things to leave and certain things to come out, but it's the first thing that like a substance has to go through before leaving or entering the organ. or the human body, if you think about it in the surface of skin. So therefore, the epithelial tissue controls permeability, controls what fluids enter and exit, because it's the first thing that the substance needs to go through, or the last thing if it's sleeping. Okay, next is most epithelial tissues contain a large sensory nerve supply, which brings that information of what's happening in those external and internal environments to the brain, so the brain can act accordingly. So epithelial tissue contributes to that sensory function. And the last main function I'm going to talk about is epithelial tissue produces secretions. And this is a completely different category of epithelial tissue that does this. It's like a separate category than what I kind of talked about for those tissues. It's a different category from all of these, but it's called glandular epithelium. Okay, and which contains the type of cells glands are made of, which are the structures that produce fluid secretions. So these cells can either secrete their fluids to the surface of the epithelium to regulate temperature or contribute to physical protection, which we'll talk about when we get to the skin, or they can release those fluids into the surrounding internal environment to act as chemical messengers, which are hormones. So let me just write that down real quick. Glandular epithelium. Sorry, I'm just talking, but I'm not writing anything. Because I'm just moving my hands around and speaking, but I need to hopefully, where's me? Did I spell epithelium right? Okay, I think I did. But yeah, so this is more specific stuff, and the whole other thing glandular epithelium, it's still part of epithelial tissue, but it's just a lot more content that's a little more just different, I guess. So if you guys want me to make a video devoted to glands, I can do that for sure. Just let me know if you want me to do that, or I might just make it anyways in the future. But either way, let me know. But anyways, that is the end of this video. But I would like to point something out that I didn't cover every specific detail about this type of tissue. So it's just not as confusing initially, and I hopefully did not make it confusing. So if there are any questions or things you're specifically curious about this type of tissue, then please feel free to comment those down below and we can definitely discuss it. But anyways, thank you so much for watching this video and stay tuned for future videos. Bye.